I'm glad to see everyone here tonight. And I'm looking forward to paying tribute to these fearless leaders who stood up and fought back against all odds. We pay tribute to them and honor the work they did to improve the lives of many. All of them are an inspiration, and we build on their legacy in our efforts to build a strong revolutionary feminist movement. After I go into the lives of these remarkable women, I will share my experiences of running as a U.S. Vice President. I didn't run as a Democrat, and I didn't run as a Republican. I ran as a Freedom Socialist Party candidate. I ran with, I was part of the Durham López Millionaire campaign, and I ran with Stephen Durham, who was the FSP candidate for U.S. President.
No millionaire.
Unmillionaire. Oh, unmillionaire. Unmillionaire. That's right, unmillionaire campaign. Thanks for the correction. Radical Women endorsed our campaign because we had a socialist feminist platform. And I can honestly say that after I ran for office, that all of us deserve better than the two-party system has to offer. And I'll go more into that later. Right now, I want to celebrate and pay tribute to rousing women leaders who fought to expand voting rights while challenging the dominance of the two-party system. I want to begin by talking about two Native American women. Chicana was from the Yankton Sioux Nation, and Lucy Nicolau Pula, a member of the Penobscot Nation. Both stood up for Native Americans and fought for voting rights. Chicana was born in 1876 and she died in 1936. She was sent to one of those notorious boarding schools where Native American children were abused or forced to give up their identities and Native American customs. She was beaten for using her tribal language. This traumatic experience made her staunchly opposed to the annihilation of indigenous cultures and a strong leader for Native American rights. She became a political activist. She was also a writer, composer, and educator. She wrote about her experience to educate the public on the plight faced by indigenous people. Though women won the right to vote in 1920, many Native Americans could not vote because they were not considered U.S. citizens. Chicana worked to change this. She lobbied for what became the Indian Citizenship Act in 1924. Before this act was signed, if Native Americans wanted to become U.S. citizens, they had to give up their identities. And this policy went along with the genocidal policies at that time. The Indian Citizen Act recognized that First Nation peoples as used as citizens, and they did not have to give up their Native American identities. They were able to maintain their tribal standings. So that was a very important act. Unfortunately, the act did not give Native people the right to vote. That was left up to the states, and we all know how that goes, right? Yeah, right. Some states enacted laws like that those living on reservations could not vote. Imagine that. You're finally recognized as a U.S. citizen, and then a racist law is enacted that you could not vote if you lived on the reservation. So Native people went to battle, state by state, to get the right to vote. And though they had some victories, people were often prevented from voting. Poll taxes, literacy tests, threats were used against them, just like they were against Black Americans. The battle to vote continued till the 1960s when the Voting Rights Act was finally signed. Today, the fight Chicana was part of continues as Native American voting rights are again under attack. Another Native American Sheroes that I would like to talk about is Lucy Nicolau Pula. She was born in 1982 and died in 1969. Oh, 1882. 1882. I don't know why I keep saying 1982. 1882. She was still with us in 1982 in spirit. But yeah, she was born in 1882 and died in 1969. She was a member of the Penobscot Nation, where she was a vaudeville performer, and as a performer, she sang opera and Native American songs. And she was not afraid to bring politics to her performances. For example, instead she used her status as a performer to talk about better education and voting rights for Native Americans. As I was reading about her, one of my favorite stories was her participation at an immigration debate in 1900 when she was 17 years old. Right before she was ready to perform, she responded to the racist view that immigration was dangerous and threatening to all true Americans. This was said right before she was to perform, and Lucy rose up and said, I believe I am the only true American here. And I think you have decided rightly. Of all my forefathers' country, from the St. John to the Connecticut, we now have but a little island, 1.5 mile square. There are about only 500 of us now. We are very happy on our island, but we are poor. The railroad corporations, which did their fair share of robbing us of our land, are now begrudging us the half-rate fare. But we forgive you all. I love how she took them on, man. I love that. Lucy Nicolau Pulau and her husband opened up a shop in the Pensacola Native Reservation, and Lucy, along with her sister, continued with their activism. Voting rights for Native Americans was finally successful in Maine in 1955. Wow. 1955. Lucy was the first Native person to cast a ballot in Maine, and that photo of her right there, that shows her voting. So that's an historical photo. But 1955. Wow. The next Shero I want to talk about, I'm going to ask a question. Who is the first woman to run for U.S. president? Victoria Woodhull. Thank you. You win a prize. She was born in 1838. Come on, get with the right. She was born in 1838 and died in 1927. She ran for president at a time when women were denied the right to vote. Wow. Yeah. This is also when women were also denied most other rights, including place in public life. Woodhull was married at the age of 15. She divorced her abusive husband after 11 years, and she did this when divorce was seen as scandalous for women, especially mothers, to do so. Women were expected to stay home, be obedient wives, and all that. Victoria Woodhull would have none of this. Instead, she became a free love advocate, meaning women should have the right to marry, divorce, and have children without legal restrictions or government interference. Right on. You know what? She definitely would have been for women with cats. Right on. To support herself and her family, Victoria opened up a salon with her sister, Tennessee. She also opened up a brokerage firm that specialized in women clients. The firm was a huge success, and they made lots of money. And with that money, they opened up a newspaper, Woodhull and Claflin's Weekly, in 1870. And guess what? Their newspaper was radical. It published the Communist Manifesto, and it was the first American publication to do so. The paper was also pro-union and pro-civil rights. Woodhull, you know, she just keeps going, man. Woodhull used her standing as a newspaper publisher to gain entry into public life. Women were not supposed to do so, but she did it anyways. She was the first woman to address a U.S. congressional committee that was looking at giving the vote to women. She argued before these men that they did not have a right to deny women the right to vote. As the Constitution stated, all citizens have those rights, and it did not specify gender. She was right about this, although they didn't vote it in. So, you know, it took a struggle. What do you can say? They were elected officials, so it took a struggle. Anyways, Victoria also believed suffrage was only one part of the larger fight for full women's liberation. She believed it was also a social and economic fight. I totally agree with this. Victoria Woodhull was nominated by the Equal Rights Party to run for U.S. President in 1982. The party... 1882. My God, what is it with that century? 1882. Okay, let's go back in time, you guys. 1882. The 1800s. You know what? 1800s was very traumatic for Native Americans, so they 1800s. Okay, 1872. I didn't have 1872. Victoria Woodhull was nominated to the Equal Rights Party to run for U.S. President in 1872. And the party was formed to support women's rights and hoped to bring together socialist reformers and civil rights and the suffrage movement together, something that the other parties weren't doing, so yay for them. Victoria's platform included gender and racial equality, tax reform, and opposition to land grants given to the railroads and corporations. These were the people that were stealing Native American lands, so good for them. Another amazing woman and newspaper publisher is Ida B. Wells Burnett. She was born in 1862 and died in 1931. Yes. She was one of the beneficiaries of the Reconstruction in the years that followed the end of the Civil War. This was a time when freed slaves expanded public education, built black colleges, and improved their economic standing, and were elected to office. All of which came to an end with the emergence of KKK terror and Jim Crow laws. Ida B. Wells became an educator and writer and newspaper owner and editor. She used her investigative journalistic skills to write about the unjust conditions of segregation. After investigating the horrors of lynchings during the 1990s, she launched an anti-lynching campaign and civil rights movement. She saw that it was important to stand up and fight back, and it was a matter of survival. Her work brought international attention to the brutal violence faced by Black Americans in the United States. In this, she was a pioneer, man. Her activism included women's rights and suffrage. She was a founder of the National Association of Colored Women's Club. Ida B. Wells was organically intersectional when she openly criticized other suffragist leaders like Frances E. Willard for their racism. An awful part of the suffragist movement was the racism that ensued after the 15th Amendment was passed, giving Black men the right to vote but not women. To increase suffrage support, Willard and others fearlessly aligned themselves with Southern women and said some racist things that I don't think is worth repeating right here. But Ida B. Wells did not let that go. She called them out on their racism and also got a newspaper interview where she mentioned the stuff they said, and they didn't like that. They tried to shut it down and they were unsuccessful. In her autobiography, Ida B. Wells said of Willard that she unhesitantly slaughtered the entire Negro race in order to get favor with those who were hanging, shooting, and burning Negroes alive. That's in her words. In response to the suffragist leaders who felt only white women should have the right to vote, Ida B. Wells organized with two white women, Belle Squire and Virginia Brooks. They formed the Alpha Suffrage Club in Chicago in 1913. The organization focused on Black women who were left out of other suffragist organizations like the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NASA. The Alpha Suffrage Club, unlike NASA, stood for suffragists for all women, no matter their race or class. NASA, which is a huge mainstream organization, organized a march on Washington on March 1913. March 1913. To not offend the Southern white women by having black and women march together, they told black women to march in the back of, segregated from the rest of the marchers. Val Squire and Virginia Brooks followed Ida B. Wells to the front of the protest in defiance of this racist edict. And they marched. They marched together, linking arms, and that was a great defiance, Anyways, I could say more about Ida B. Wells, but we can go into discussion, but I need to close. Ida B. Wells was one of the original civil rights leaders who continues to inspire generations. The other black women and the rest of the Alpha Suffrage Club marched at the back with the other delegates, and one of them was Mary Church Terrell. And now I want to talk about the fabulous Mary Church Terrell. She was born in 1863 and died in 1954. The daughter of former slaves, Mary Church Terrell was a national leader for civil rights and women's suffrage. Her life, like Ida B. Wells, was uplifted with Reconstruction. Her family sent her to private school, and she graduated from Oberlin College. Her activism was sparked in 1892 when she and one of her childhood friends, when one of her childhood friends was lynched by white business owners in her hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. Her friends worked for a black-owned cooperative grocery store that was targeted because it happened to cut into the profits of a white-owned grocery store. The men were lynched for daring to arm themselves in self-defense. Terrell then joined with Ida B. Wells to start and build the anti-lynching movement. She was also took part in the suffrage movement as a passionate writer and educator. She focused her life on racial uplift. She believed that black people could end racial discrimination and advance themselves through education and political activism. A founding member of the NAACP, Terrell saw voting rights as critical to the empowerment of African Americans. As mentioned earlier, she marched in 1913 suffrage parade, where she and other African American suffragists were forced to march at the segregated section in the back. In 1906, she protested and wrote about President Theodore Roosevelt's dishonorable discharge of 167 African American soldiers in Brownville, Texas, after they were wrongly accused of murder. In her essays, Mary Church Terrell demanded an investigation and fair trial. This didn't happen then, but she started the story and wouldn't let it go, and other people picked up the story, until finally there was a documentary that inspired an investigation, and the soldiers were finally exonerated in 1972, years later. I know, and now I'm going to talk about another outstanding badass Tejana, Jovita Hidar. She was born in 1885 and died in 1946. That's her. She was born in the border town of Laredo, Texas, during a time of upheaval when there was a lot of violence against indigenous people who were being forced off their lands. She was a teacher, but she decided to become a journalist for her family's newspaper, La Crónica, to expose the harsh realities faced by Mexican and Mexican American people in Texas. These people, these are my gente. These are my grandparents, my parents, they're the ones that faced horrific lynchings and segregation. It was common to see signs, no Negroes, Mexicans, or dogs allowed. They did this to prevent Mexicanos like me from voting. I've actually heard some of these stories from my parents and my grandparents, and anyways. So it's good to see that there was a fight there. Like Ida B. Wells, Jovita Hidar didn't just write about what was going on, she organized. She helped form the first Mexican Congress to bring the Latinx community together to stand up against lynchings, segregation, and discrimination. Jovita Idar was also wrote in support of suffrage and women's rights. She founded the Liga Femenil Mexicanista, the League of Mexican Women, a feminist organization in 1911. She went to Mexico to serve as a nurse during the Mexican Revolution. When she returned a few years later, while working at another newspaper, El Progreso, she wrote an article that was critical of sending U.S. troops to the border during the Mexican Revolution. This caused the U.S. Army and the Texas Rangers to come down to the newspaper office to shut it down. Jovita stood at the door and refused to let them in and reminded them that it was against the law to prevent freedom of the press. Right. I know, and we think about this and all the journalists that risk their lives right now. This is really something. And back then, this took a lot of guts, because she did this at a time when the Texas Rangers were committing crimes against people of color and Mexicanos with impunity. Yep. This brown and proud woman stood her ground until they left. However, these idiots returned early the next morning and with a sledgehammer destroyed the press and trashed the place. The paper was shut down, but this did not silence her. Jovita continued to write critical articles against the reactionary Texas politics. She continued to organize. During the 1920s, she helped undocumented workers get nationalization after the Border Patrol was formed in 1924. I am now going to talk about another totally inspirational and personal Shero of mine, and that is Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie was born in 1917 and died in 1977. She was a farm worker during the Jim Crow segregation and when racial violence was happening in Mississippi. She began work in the fields at the age of 6 and later dropped out of school to help her family. This experience gave her the strength to become one of the strongest civil rights leaders. Her activism began after she attended a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, an organization that was founded by Ella Baker. She joined the fight to register Black people to vote. In retaliation for this, Fannie Lou Hamer was fired and forced out of her home by her plantation owner, who was also her landlord. But this did not stop her. No, she did not stop even after she was arrested and brutalized while in jail, as were many civil rights workers. In 1964, Fannie Lou Hamer went to the Democratic National Convention to protest Mississippi's all-white delegation and to get representation for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. While there, she got national attention for her speech where she laid out her experience of enduring racial violence in the South, and she spoke about the Democratic Party for not supporting, she spoke out against the Democratic Party for not supporting Black voting rights. She delivered a heart-wrenching speech that laid out the concerns of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and also questioned the limits of American democracy. She proclaimed, "I question America. Is this the land of the free and the home of the brave where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives are threatened daily? Because we want to live as decent human beings in America?" Fannie Lou Hamer is a strong leader for standing up and not backing down from the fight despite all that she faced. She turned her energies towards economic independence and housing equality and was instrumental for 200 low-income houses being built before her death in 1977. Many of those houses are still in existence. And next, I'm going to talk about the stellar Shirley Chisholm. Right there. Shirley Chisholm was born in 1924 to immigrants from Barbados. She died in 2005. In 1964, Chisholm ran for office and she won. She was selected to the New York State Legislature, and 4 years later, in 1964, Shirley ran for U.S. representative to New York's 12th district. She won that election as well and became the first African-American woman elected to Congress. While there, she supported increased funding for schools, healthcare, and social services, all to improve the lives and needs of the working class people of color, women, and children. She advocated for abortion rights, the ERA, opposed the war in Vietnam. Shirley also founded the Congressional Black Caucus and the National Women's Political Caucus. In 1972, and many of you might remember that election, she ran for U.S. president. Her campaign slogan was "Unbought and unbossed." Unbought and unbossed. She did not bow down to the corporate sponsors. The fact that she endured racist and sexist attacks did not stop her from seeking the Democratic Party's nomination. Though she did not win the nomination, Shirley Chisholm continued to be unbought and unbossed and continued to fearlessly counter the political bigwigs. She was not afraid to be voted out of office. She stuck to her convictions and continued to push for anti-poverty policies. And now I want to talk about Chicana Chiro, Marta Cotera. Marta is alive and well. She is 86 years old. She was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, and migrated to the United States in 1946 with her mother. Though she faced racist policies in the educational system in Texas, remember Jovita's story? Segregation was still a factor. She continued her education and graduated from the University of Texas in El Paso with an English and history degree. She became a U.S. citizen in 1962, the same year she became politically active. Marta got involved in the farm worker movement and protested harsh working conditions in the farm camps. She pushed for bilingual education and ethnic studies. As a librarian, she pushed to improve library circulation. You know, like what's happening now, right? She also worked with the feminist movement, which at times she found frustrating as they would leave women of color issues out. After, it occurred to me after I read about her, it came to my understanding that I'm a direct beneficiary of her work. I had the benefit of a bilingual education and ethnic studies. I'm grateful to her and all the Chicanas who stood up for La Raza and all the feminists who stood up for women. In 1972, Cotera ran for a seat in the State Board of Education on the Raza Unida Party ticket. The Raza Unida Party was formed by Mexican-American students who were inspired by the Black Civil Rights Movement. It was formed in response to the Democratic Party's failure to represent the needs of Chicanos or poor working class people. La Raza Unida was committed to ending racism and inequality. However, sexism rose within the party, and what did Marta and other women in the party do? They formed Mujeres de la Raza Unida to address and combat sexism within the party. Though Raza Unida ran electoral campaigns in Texas, Arizona, California, and Colorado, they were only able to get status in Texas, and eventually the party folded. Marta is alive and well today, and she continues to speak out and be politically active. And next, I'm going to talk about the magnificent militant Alice Paul. Alice Paul, she was born in 1885 and she died in 1977. Alice Paul grew up going to suffragist meetings with her mom. And when she moved to England to study, she followed her mother's footsteps and got involved in the suffragist movement there. The British suffragist movement happened to be militant. They organized street protest and civil disobedience. And Alice Paul took part in all this, and she got arrested for just demanding the right to vote. Her arrest did not slow Alice down. Instead, when she returned to the United States, she continued with the suffrage movement, and she brought her British experience with her. She organized street protests and marches. She was one of the people that helped organize the march in Washington in 1913, the same one that Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell took part in. Later, Alice Paul was one of the founders of the Women's Party with the goal of amending the Constitution to include voting rights for women. The group organized daily protests outside the White House. Where they did it very on a daily basis, and the protesters were arrested and beaten. Their actions had an impact. They got noticed in the newspapers. They got publicity, and it also helped change public opinion. One of those public opinions that they changed was President Wilson, or maybe they didn't change his mind, but because of their action, he was forced to call on Congress to pass a suffragist amendment. Alice believed suffrage was the first step towards full liberation and equality for women. And after the 19th Amendment was won, Alice Paul continued to fight and proposed the ERA, or Equal Rights Amendment, in 1923. That is something that we still need today. Alice Paul experience shows the influence of a militant protest in public, militant protest and its impact on public opinion. What all these Sheroes that we see back here had in common was that they did not give in to intimidation or settle for less. They were uncompromising in their fight for justice. And all these women were also an inspiration for standing up and for voting rights and for taking the fight to the electoral arena. Radical Women has endorsed Freedom Socialist candidates because the socialist feminist platform fits well with Radical Women's program. Radical Women members have also ran as FSP candidates to promote a socialist feminist platform to win people over to our ideas. I ran for vice president, but I'm not the only Radical Women who ran for office. Other members also ran as FSP candidates. They're over there. Heidi Durham and Yolanda Alanis. This dynamic duo, both city workers, ran for city council spots in 1991. They ran because they wanted to shake up City Hall and introduce fresh solutions to the many problems faced by the city. And they got endorsements and they got support. Yolanda was the first Chicana to run for city council. And Heidi was one of the original female electrical trades trainees hired by the Seattle City Light in the mid-1970s. And the solutions that they proposed got endorsements, and they also got support. When Durham proposed taxing big business to fund the revitalization of decaying cities and provide nationalized health care, she won enthusiastic support from elder citizens at a senior picnic. This contrasts to the current reactionary council who just wants to round them up and lock them up. Yep, right. When Alanis demanded community control over the police and repeal the city's racist drug loitering ordinance, she was met with a chorus of "Right On" from African American community parade observers. Heidi and Yolanda also called on the firing of Metro Transit bosses who refused to negotiate a fair labor agreement, and they also were for extending domestic partnership rights to all workers and to end the forced HIV testing. The next Radical Women to run for office is Gary Hodderson, an inspiration to all of us. Gary is one of the founders of the United Front Against Fascism. She is also a civil rights activist, and she ran in 1998 1998 for state representative of the 37th district. I have, one of the first things I did when I joined Radical Women was volunteer for her campaign, and I have a lot of good memories of when I volunteered for her campaign. I remember going door to door to hand out placards and getting into really interesting conversations about her platform. You know, Henderson's campaign included a call for statewide rent control and using the $768 million state budget surplus to fund public housing, to build public housing. Yeah, that is something, when you think of homeless prices, that. Her call for statewide rent control popularized the demand. She also called for raising the minimum wage, expanding affirmative action, and repealing property taxes for small businesses and homeowners. Instead, she called for the creation of a corporate income tax. That's right, let's tax the wealth. Linda Averill. She's a veteran bus driver. Linda ran for city council twice in the early 2000s. She used her campaign to talk about improving working people and women's lives with mandated employer-funded child care for all, safeguards to abortion and contraception, and strengthening anti-discrimination laws. She fought to increase the minimum wage and also she also pushed to decriminalize sex work, and this was big at the time. Linda got a lot of respect when she called for unionizing and union wages for sex workers also. The interesting part of Linda's campaign is the disclosure case. Despite campaign rules and pressure to disclose the name of campaign donors, Linda fought to keep their names private. This was an important fight because of the threat and retaliation and harassment faced by people who donate to her campaign. She fought and won this disclosure case with the Ethics and Elections Department. As we all know, when we fight, we win. And now I will talk about my experience. Yes, I ran for vice president, and let me tell you, it was exciting experience because I got to promote a socialist feminist platform. I was also fortunate that I got to run with Stephen Durham. I loved the way he listened and explained the politics with a vibrant passion that drew people in. I learned a lot from Stephen, and he is an inspiration to me. Together, we went far and wide to promote our unmillionaire campaign. We talked with students, anti-war activists, environmentalists, newspapers about our platform. Our platform called for nationalizing healthcare under workers' control.
Yeah.
We also called on diverting billions that go to the Pentagon to fully fund things like childcare, education, housing, healthcare, and social services designed to improve people's lives. We also called and spoke out against the militarization of the borders. Jovita, Ilar, we were there with you. And instead, we put our platform to open the borders. You know what I found out? That people were supportive and receptive to socialist feminism and the ideas that Stephen and I put out. There's one of the stories that I like, and I always remember when I was at a college speaking to a large group of students, I was asked the question, but isn't democracy better than socialism? That was the question, and as I was gathering my thoughts, I said, that's a good question. And as I was saying, I asked the question, what kind of democracy are you talking about? And there was silence. And I said, how many of you would vote to give billions of dollars to the military? No one rose their hands. No one. How many of you would rather use those money to fund education where you don't have to go into debt for your education, for housing, for social service? And people lit up and said, oh, and did this. They didn't clap because they were like, and this, I always remember that because that was the purpose of us running. We wanted to raise these issues, but also raise people's consciousness. And that's what happened in that room. They might have not become socialist overnight, but at least they understand that this democracy that they're told is the best in the world has flaws.
Right.
It is decrepit, it is evil, and so they know that because you're sending billions of dollars to go kill people. When you got people here and abroad that are suffering.
Right.
And I'll always remember that because when I asked that question, I said, okay, should I go into this theoretical, what the socialists do? I said, no, I asked the question. You know, and that's one thing when you're running for a campaign, you have to learn how to speak at the, you know, anyways, let me go back to my Okay, so, okay, that was my experience. You know, anyways, I spoke at many colleges and, you know, it was a rewarding experience. So if anyone is asked upon to run for a candidate for FSP, do it. Okay. I'm going to tell you something. The voters deserve better. In the U.S., voter turnout is traditionally low compared to other countries. And you can guess why. I mean, everybody knows they're both evil. The lesser of two evil. I mean, we need a party that's for the common good. And I wonder if that is because there is so little choice. When Biden and Trump debated, neither of them in their infamous debate, neither of them could answer the simple question about child care costs. I mean, this is a basic need that families across the party lines suffer, right? Child care cost is astronomical. Those idiots could not even answer that. We have a solution, right?
You and Steven.
Yeah, that's right. Fully funded. Tax the wealth funded. This is the wealthiest country in the world. You can fund it.
Right.
Anyways, so, and, you know, anyways, and what happens when neither side has solutions? You get rid. And when neither side, you know, they both scapegoat. They're both racist. I see this at my job at the courts. You know, Seattle, for all its liberalism, is targeting homeless people and locking them up. You were talking about people dealing with homelessness, mental problems, substance abuse problems, and you know what we need is what behavioral health. We need social services.
Right.
We need you know, to improve people's lives, but this current right-wing city council, they need to be opposed. We need to do what these women did and say, hey, we're not going to take it from you guys, you know, and we're going to protest. And on the national scene, let's be clear. I know that people are, you know, a Trump win, you know, let's face it, it will be terrible. And but there's still a lot of hope for the Harrison-Walz campaign because their policies will not be perceived as harsh as the Plan 2025 or anything else Trump stands for. There are some that are hoping that a Harrison-Walz win will maybe get some much-needed economic reforms to help working people survive. The Democrats, you know, they will promise good things, but if you look at their history, they somehow have a habit of forgetting those campaign promises once they are in office.
Yeah, right.
And a big reason for this is because the primary objective of the Democrats and also the Republicans is their job is to maintain the economic system and keep the profits flowing to the wealthy. Let's keep the wealth flowing to the top. That's their motive. That's their objective. And none of that wealth trickles down to the workers. It just brings more misery to the workers. Right. And so, another reason why people are excited about the nomination of Kamala Harris is because she is Black and Asian. And yes, we must defend her against the racism and sexist attacks that she has received as a woman of color candidate. At the same time, I cannot support her campaign. Because she is running as a Democrat pro-capitalist candidate. Arms will be continued to send to Israel. Though it was great that the Palestinian activists were there protesting, you know, we need to actually build a resistance movement to help the Palestinian cause, and I think it was great that they did that. So what we working people need is an anti-capitalist party, a feminist and labor party that speaks to us. I want to just go instead, I want to really close with what Norma, she wrote this, Norma Gallego, she's a radical women member in the Bay Area. She wrote this Women's Rights Day leaflet, and I'm going to quote from her. She writes at the end, and the leaflet's over there, I encourage everyone to read it. She writes, "We can do better. Both the Democrats and the Republicans are political parties run by billionaires who want working class people under their thumbs. Their limited option ballot box cannot grant the freedom and liberation sought by women, people of color, LGBTQIA folks, and the most marginalized. Voting for the lesser of two evils is disempowering. Let's move forward the way civil liberties and voting rights were won. Together, we can build a movement that is pro-labor, pro-immigrant, pro-abortion, pro-Palestinian, for all indigenous people. This is the way we honor our fearless four mothers on Women's Rights Day, by forging a multiracial, radical, working-class feminist movement. And this is why I'm a radical women member. I wanted to stand up and fight racism and sexism. The women that we salute tonight, they knew how to wage battles and they knew how to win, and so can we. Thank you.